Bueno, la CIM tiene una agenda enorme en el tema de democracia y de liderazgos. El primer ámbito tiene que ver con la gobernanza electoral, para que esta gobernanza electoral responda a las necesidades con las que fue creada, y es buscar los espacios de redistribución del poder. Después hay un programa interamericano sobre liderazgo de las mujeres, donde generamos conocimiento y también tenemos cursos de capacitación. Hay un poderoso curso que ha llegado a más de 1000 mujeres con más de 15 ediciones, que es para candidatas electorales, en las cuales conversamos con ellas, pero también nos ponemos en una agenda de solidaridad y articulación y alianzas entre las mujeres, a pesar de las múltiples diferencias ideológicas o de partidos políticos. También hablamos de los temas de violencia política, porque no es lo mismo llegar que quedarse, y la violencia política es una forma de ejercicio de disciplinar a las mujeres para que vuelvan al mundo de lo privado y enfrentar la violencia, hacer buenas investigaciones, buenas leyes que permitan sancionar la violencia política. Es parte de las aspiraciones de la CIM en este programa de liderazgo de las mujeres. La aspiración histórica de las mujeres es estar en el mundo de lo público, que nuestro trabajo sea remunerado y que tenga un reconocimiento. COVID ha puesto en evidencia una profundización de las brechas existentes para el logro de este objetivo. Estas brechas existentes ahora dan cuenta de que podríamos tener un rezago de más de 2 décadas en el mundo laboral, que el cierre de brechas que se previó que podía tardar 100 años en cerrarse, ahora se habla de 135 años para cerrar la brecha entre los hombres y las mujeres. Entonces, nuestro objetivo es que miren el derecho de las mujeres al empoderamiento económico, que el statement "quédate en casa", que es un viejo conocido del patriarcado, no sea que nos quedemos en casa siempre, y que entendamos que la inserción de la mitad de la población, de este talento humano que tiene una serie de ventajas competitivas, es necesario para el crecimiento económico. De manera que la CIM está colocando esta realidad, está colocando las necesidades de las mujeres y está haciendo unas recomendaciones de rutas para poder cumplir con el derecho al empoderamiento económico y con el crecimiento económico que requieren nuestras empobrecidas economías en tiempos de COVID.
Hoy, esta organización es el guardián regional en defensa de la democracia, la libertad y los derechos humanos. Los países se han comprometido con estos valores a través de instrumentos legales como la Carta Democrática Interamericana, la Convención Americana de Derechos Humanos y todas las demás convenciones interamericanas. Nuestro trabajo es mantener los más altos estándares. Debemos ser objetivos, analizar los hechos, denunciar cuando veamos corrupción, inequidad o amenazas a la libertad. En esos casos no podemos ser neutrales.
More than 100 years since the inauguration of this building, the OAS headquarters, our institution still brings together the peoples of the Americas to address our responsibilities as a partnership of nations. As we look to the future, our work must also focus on the construction of a positive agenda that continues to favorably impact millions of lives every day.
The COVID-19 pandemic brought unprecedented challenges to our member states and the people we serve. In response, the OAS Secretariat for Integral Development adopted a three-pronged approach by 1. Adjusting our portfolio of existing projects, 2. Exploring new projects to meet emerging needs, and 3. Expanding multi-sectoral partnerships. The results achieved in 2020 demonstrate the resilience of our member states and the commitment of the OAS SETI to work with member states and partners towards our common goals in the development of our region. Our Network on Competitiveness launched the COVID-19 Ideas Accelerator, sharing 250 tools, health solutions, responses, and recovery plans. The Network for Labor Administration published a portfolio of responses from ministries of labor to COVID-19, sharing over 420 measures taken to protect workers, employment, and income. Likewise, the Inter-American Teacher Education Network series, Teaching STEM in Quarantine, provided 117,000 teachers with key tools to continue advancing STEM education during the pandemic. Through its network and platforms, the Inter-American Committee on Ports promoted international and national best practices, guidelines, protocols, and recommendations on COVID-19 safety measures and continuity of logistic operations. Initiatives such as the Education in Times of Change platform allowed us to meet urgent needs by offering timely tools on virtual education and a dedicated space for ministries to share strategies, actions, and solutions. Other programs such as the Row Fund stepped up, providing emergency grants to offset the challenges imposed on our students by the pandemic. SETI's partnerships are adding value to member states in the form of technical assistance, training, and access to tools and services. In partnership with leading private sector institutions, we offered micro, small, and medium enterprises access to online tools and training, increasing their visibility and participation in e-commerce, a key to their survival and growth in the pandemic and post-pandemic era. A new OAS SETI Facebook initiative provided 85,000 MSMEs across the region with capacity building opportunities and WhatsApp business tools to aid response, recovery, and resilience building. The Caribbean Small Business Development Center's program achieved real impact, supporting new businesses, expanding sales, and driving growth. A new network of Caribbean SPDCs will broaden the program's reach. The Inter-American Committee on Tourism, the CTOUR, convened ministerial-level policy dialogue in an urgent response to the impact of the pandemic on the hard-hit tourism and hospitality sectors. Policymakers and experts discussed biosanitary protocols, travel and visa facilitation, among other critical areas for the sector's recovery. Partnering with the George Washington University and the U.S. Bureau of Indian Affairs, we went ahead with the scheduled first Indigenous Tourism Forum of the Americas, pivoting to a virtual format and convening over 240 participants from indigenous communities, the private sector, and governments. SETI also integrated sustainable development practices in the COVID-19 response. The pandemic is a daily reminder of the links between water, health, sanitation, food security, and nutrition. We ensured the continuity of our water management projects in the Plata Basin and worked with governments and partners in the design of an investment portfolio valued at $90 million. Additionally, the Energy and Climate Partnership of the Americas continued to share relevant best practices and responses to the pandemic on energy and air quality. These few examples indicate our collective impact. We cannot do this alone. It is now more urgent than ever to address the region's structural weaknesses, to recover from the health, economic, and social crises occasioned by the pandemic and prepare for future shocks. It is imperative that we work together as we risk losing recent development gains and seeing millions fall back into poverty. It is time for the region to redirect course and pursue a more sustainable, resilient, and equitable future for all. We are in this together.
But the resilience building agenda is too big for any one stakeholder to address acting alone, and simply bringing together stakeholders, whether at the national, subnational, regional, or global level, is not enough. Effective, focused, and sustained coordination among stakeholders is paramount to provide countries with integrated and comprehensive support.
The OAS, as a hemispheric forum and honest broker, must continue to facilitate this process while we work with member states towards the attainment of the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. Cooperation, collaboration, and partnerships that include all actors strengthen us, enabling us to be more than the sum of our parts. We can and we must work together. The future of our region depends on it.
Bueno, la CIM tiene una agenda enorme en el tema de democracia y de liderazgos. El primer ámbito tiene que ver con la gobernanza electoral, para que esta gobernanza electoral responda a las necesidades con las que fue creada, y es buscar los espacios de redistribución del poder. Después hay un programa interamericano sobre el liderazgo de las mujeres, donde generamos conocimiento y también tenemos cursos de capacitación. Hay un poderoso curso que ha llegado a más de 1000 mujeres con más de 15 ediciones, que es para candidatas electorales, en las cuales conversamos con ellas, pero también nos ponemos en una agenda de solidaridad y articulación y alianzas entre las mujeres, a pesar de las múltiples diferencias ideológicas o de partidos políticos. También hablamos de los temas de violencia política, porque no es lo mismo llegar que quedarse, y la violencia política es una forma de ejercicio de disciplinar a las mujeres para que vuelvan al mundo de lo privado y enfrentar la violencia, hacer buenas investigaciones, buenas leyes que permitan sancionar la violencia política. Es parte de las aspiraciones de la CIM en este programa de liderazgo de las mujeres. La aspiración histórica de las mujeres es estar en el mundo de lo público, que nuestro trabajo sea remunerado y que tenga un reconocimiento. COVID ha puesto en evidencia una profundización de las brechas existentes para el logro de este objetivo. Estas brechas existentes ahora dan cuenta de que podríamos tener un rezago de más de 2 décadas en el mundo laboral. Que el cierre de brechas, que se previó que podía tardar 100 años en cerrarse, ahora se habla de 135 años para cerrar la brecha entre los hombres y las mujeres. Entonces nuestro objetivo es que miren el derecho de las mujeres al empoderamiento económico, que el statement quédate en casa, que es un viejo conocido del patriarcado, no sea que nos quedemos en casa siempre, y que entendamos que la inserción de la mitad de la población, de este talento humano que tiene una serie de ventajas competitivas, es necesario para el crecimiento económico. De manera que la CIM está colocando esta realidad, está colocando las necesidades de las mujeres y está haciendo unas recomendaciones de rutas para poder cumplir con el derecho al empoderamiento económico y con el crecimiento económico que requieren nuestras empobrecidas economías en tiempos de COVID.
Hoy, esta organización es el guardián regional en defensa de la democracia, la libertad y los derechos humanos. Los países se han comprometido con estos valores a través de instrumentos legales como la Carta Democrática Interamericana, la Convención Americana de Derechos Humanos y todas las demás convenciones interamericanas. Nuestro trabajo es mantener los más altos estándares. Debemos ser objetivos, analizar los hechos, denunciar cuando veamos corrupción, inequidad o amenazas a la libertad. En esos casos no podemos ser neutrales.
than 100 years since the inauguration of this building, the OAS headquarters, our institution still brings together the peoples of the Americas to address our responsibilities as a partnership of nations. As we look to the future, our work must also focus on the construction of a positive agenda that continues to favorably impact millions of lives every day.
Our invitation to share your experiences and accompany our deliberations. I also greet Maris Robert and all the staff of the Secretariat. I'm pleased to welcome you to this meeting, which is being held virtually, a meeting of the Inter-American Council for Integral Development. Ms. Robert tells me that we have the quorum required to begin our work. I would ask, Director, if you could read out the delegations present in alphabetical order. Yes, of course. At this time, we have 21 countries: Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Colombia, Costa Rica, Ecuador, El Salvador, the United States of America, Grenada, Guatemala, Haiti, Honduras, Jamaica, Mexico, Nicaragua, Panama, Paraguay, Dominican Republic, St. Kitts and Nevis, and St. Vincent and Grenadines. Thank you, Chair. Thank you. As we have quorum, we can proceed to take up the items on this agenda. And as other delegations join, we'll take note of their participation. As the first item, we put to you for your consideration the draft order of business, document CD/OD 121/22. If there are no objections, the draft order of business is approved. It's approved. Colleagues and special guests, it is unquestionable that the COVID-19 pandemic has revealed and deepened structural inequalities at the same time as it has raised new issues globally. The last 2 years have been characterized by great uncertainty tied to a major health and economic crisis whose severe consequences entail challenges that the states must necessarily address. These are challenges that have placed at risk major gains that the region had achieved after decades of fighting poverty and strengthening social protection systems. Understanding these as the whole set of policies to guarantee economic, social, and cultural rights, basic such rights, such as health, education, work, adequate food, and social security, among others. The setbacks that we've experienced also call into question the possibilities of the states moving towards accomplishing the targets of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. In order to address the pandemic, the governments, it appears that the chair has lost her connection. Yes, we've completely lost the chair, says the technician.
Pido a la Secretaría.
I would ask the Secretariat, can you hear me, to please show the presentation by Maria Inés Castillo de San Martín of Panama. Cordial greetings from Panama, the authorities who are with us, to the authorities who are with us, ambassadors, permanent and alternate representatives, dear friends. In the context of the holding of this regular meeting of the Inter-American Council for Integral Development, we should reflect on how we can move towards strengthening social protection in an integral manner recognizing it as a fundamental strategy for addressing the persistent social needs throughout the Americas, including those emerging ones that have resulted from the COVID-19 pandemic. This third decade that we're just beginning is key for making decisions and carrying out the actions that will define not only the future and the intensity of the 2030 agenda, but much more important than that is the future of millions and millions of persons. After almost 2 years after this health crisis began, the world, our region, and our countries, well, we are all evolving. It is a process of adaptation in which one seeks to innovate and apply new and diverse and alternative ways of interacting, working, learning, living together, and coexisting. In this regard, we have been engaged in an exercise of reestablishing priorities with a view to recovery and sustainable growth, integrating knowledge and resilience so as to effectively attain the SDGs in a scenario of constant changes in the post-pandemic. The government of Panama, led by His Excellency, the President of the Republic, Laurentino Cortizo Cohen, has always maintained as one of his main priorities fighting poverty and inequality, promoting integral social policies aimed at achieving the development and well-being of our population. This strategy has been called the Beehive Strategy, and that is part of our country commitment to the 2030 Agenda and the National Strategic Plan as a vision of the state, which seeks to reduce poverty through policies and social programs that prioritize the population with the greatest needs, facilitating access to basic services, social assistance, and family accompaniment, making it possible to accumulate human capital. It's because of this that the startup of this Beehive Strategy is our accelerator in the decade of action for attaining the SDGs. The Beehive Plan is a new strategy for territorial intervention through a multi-sectorial offer tied into the local governments and the response to the communities in more than 300 districts that have the greatest multidimensional poverty. Now, in the case of Panama, controlling, managing, and fighting the pandemic has left a positive mark in respect of citizen mobility, seeking common solutions and partnerships. During the pandemic, the national government guaranteed a floor of social protection through an emergency social assistance program, and specifically by providing for digital vouchers in a special Panama Solidarity Plan. We have benefited from more than 1.4 million people have benefited from this plan. Women have received 51.58% of the benefits delivered to the population. It should be noted that this initiative has won the Excellency Prize of the Latin American and Caribbean e-government network organized by the OAS and the IDB in the category of digital governance vis-a-vis COVID-19. And as regards the impact, there's very significant data, such as the ECLAC and FAO report, which show that despite the pandemic in Panama, we have been able to reduce extreme poverty and prevent an increase in hunger. At the same time, we have maintained and strengthened conditioned money transfer programs or cash transfer programs by improving its targeting. And I should note that through this program, more than 191,000 families are benefited. Out of this total, women account for 69.8%. In particular, there's been major support for women heads of household. Resilient and sustainable recovery from the pandemic requires that we control and eradicate the disease in the short and medium term. A firm step in that direction are the processes of vaccinating the population being carried out at this time. This has enabled us to apply more than 7 million doses in our country, reaching more than 90% of the target population, and vaccinated women account for 51.36% of the total. Also in this context, a number of initiatives have been taken with the support of several sectors which have multiplied and increased results with social content, human solidarity, and sustainable growth. In general, addressing the socioeconomic and environmental sequelae of the COVID-19 pandemic calls on us to continue strengthening our collaboration, sharing our experiences, and strengthening an ongoing dialogue on the challenges and lessons learned. And this requires strengthening the mechanisms for international cooperation among our countries and with other regions in order to support one another in this common challenge. In addition, it is important to note that the coming tasks that in order to take on the decade of action realistically will depend largely on the level of social cohesion that makes possible articulated participation and action of different social sectors and actors for a sustained recovery guided by the 2030 Agenda. The resilient recovery of our countries goes beyond simply defeating the COVID-19 pandemic. If we must really guarantee that our countries are able to go forward towards sustainable social development. Each crisis brings with it huge opportunities, and I consider that the greatest accomplishment for our country was accompanying and supporting people and redesigning programs to expand the coverage of services in the pandemic, drawing on innovative programs. In addition, having maintained the economic support through the conditioned cash transfers and psychosocial care for vulnerable populations. Having said all this, the challenge that remains, and for which we'll continue to work tirelessly, is to guarantee social justice and protection for all citizens with priority on those at the greatest disadvantage, so as to leave no one behind. Thank you very much. I thank the delegation of Panama for making it possible for us to have these important remarks. I ask that you transmit to Minister Castillo San Martin our recognition for her participation in this meeting, so that we will be able to continue drawing on her experience and support. Next, the Secretariat is asking that we project the statement by the Minister of Social Intervention of Uruguay, Mr. Martin Lema. Good morning to all of the participants who are participating in this important entity. I also greet the various international authorities who are also part of this meeting, and our gratitude to those who have brought about this forum for sharing experiences to share lessons with different countries. As the Ministry of Social Development, we face any number of challenges in the area of social protection, knowing that social policy and human development cannot be done alone. We need to articulate with other institutions. There must be a complement of efforts with other institutions that make it possible to strengthen services. When we talk about social protection, the first thing that comes across our mind is that we want people to have tools and opportunities. The opportunities create autonomy and independence, and with that, it helps contribute to greater well-being. The tools allow for better leveraging of those opportunities. And because of that, in all the different departments of the Ministry of Social Development, every action has to be geared to that aim. Our ministry is a very heterogeneous one. We have the National Food Institute, or Food and Nutrition Institute, the National Women's Institute, the National Youth Institute, everything having to do with homeless persons, as well as persons who are deprived of liberty for different reasons, families, as well as care for early childhood. We also have a National Institute for Older Persons, and there are any number of offices or guidelines that require that we make our best effort. And this has to do with different points that come into play in the articulation that was just mentioned, but particularly gauging the impact of each of the actions that we're carrying out. And that heterogeneity means that we need to do a cut and paste, or we cannot simply do a cut and paste of the policies we adopt. Rather, we need to give meticulous detail, particularly mindful of each of the characteristics of each situation. In addition to the various offices and bureaus I've mentioned, we also have different programs for cash transfers, having to do with families, having to do with food stamps, food stamp-like programs and the like. In these months, together with the Assistant Secretary of the Ministry, I came in May of 2021, and each of the different bureaus, we have done our best to bring about those opportunities. There's one main line which is fundamental for us, which is early childhood. Early childhood is what will describe what we want as a country now, but with a concept of generosity, looking to the future. Early childhood is where the economic increase that could be adopted in the budget, that's where it's going to be targeted so as to support that very important age bracket that is going to define the country that we want. When we talk about early childhood, we have 5 main lines. More accompaniment, we're going to incorporate technical experts throughout the country to help different families be able to get ahead. We have a bond for children. This is economic support focused on early childhood, focused on lower income households that are subject to more extreme vulnerability. At the same time, we're improving information systems in order to make sure that access to benefits can be more fair. And it's unjust if a family gets benefits without meeting the requirements, but it's much more unjust for a family that does qualify to not receive the benefits. That's why the information system is taking advantage of technology so as to be much more surgical in terms of access or non-access to different social benefits. We have also done an early, come up with an early detection for special problems in newborns. For example, when there is a newborn, we want a social assessment, just as there's a medical assessment, we also want to have a social assessment in order to be able to learn in depth what is the social reality of that newborn so that so that accompaniment can integrally attack different scourges that might be present in the habitat where these children grow up. And the 5th has to do with the national integrated system of care. With our national care system, we're going to strengthen it, focused on early childhood, with something which is very important, which are we have socio-educational integration fellowships or scholarships. So if there is not close access for the public sector, then we could have spaces in private kindergartens for these children, and in this way create more opportunities. Another example, transfer payments. We're at a point where the family allowance in the equity plan can be accumulated with formal sector work with no limit. The idea is to create incentives for joining the formal sector and having to make sure that people can have the resources to be able to address any number of situations of vulnerability. And we're going to continue setting an example in respect of homeless persons. In 2021, we had a historical situation in which there was no shelter missing for persons who might be out in inclement weather. And we wanted to have second opportunities. We're housing older persons who are in establishments that are crucial for being able to create an opportunity and safeguard their dignity. We're working to strengthen food and nutrition systems. That is also so important in what I was just saying. We are strengthening services for women victims of violence. We have a 24/7 hotline so that women can sound an alert when they face such circumstances. And I don't want to speak at such length because I know that my time is limited, but I would like to say that I feel very proud of the work that is done by the teams in our countries, the citizen response that we have to the various measures. We wanted to share our experience with you. The experience of these countries is what will allow for a well, it's a two-way street. We want to share what we're doing well, and then there are areas in which we make mistakes, like human endeavor. Well, there are always mistakes. And so I think that this exchange is one of the greatest collaborative efforts we can make for our countries. So we are ready and willing to share experiences, both those we consider successful as well as those in which we've made mistakes, because both yield important lessons and, most important, can contribute to greater social protection, to contribute to human development. And that means one will be right on target as well as make mistakes. So I'd like to thank all of the participants, the various international organizations, and we look forward to continuing to share experiences. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank the delegation of Uruguay. I ask that he convey our recognition to Minister Lemos for his participation in this meeting, and he can rest assured that his contributions will be fundamental for continuing forward in our working agenda. We're now going to begin a panel that will include Ramon Montes Barreto and Mr. Espinal and Cid. The panel will be moderated by the Secretariat for Access to Rights and Equity, by Maria Carmen Plata. One of the things that I just heard from Minister Lemo at the end is that mistakes can also be used to continue strengthening institutions. The perfect is the enemy of what's possible. And part of the capital that an organization such as the OAS has is the work of its different secretariats and the possibility of strengthening the work internally. And that is why this chair has placed special emphasis on communicating experiences and institutional strengths that exist within the OAS. And having said this, I offer the floor to Ms. Maria Carmen Plata to begin to moderate the panel. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ambassador Roquebert, Chair of the Council, and thank you, Maurice Robert. I'm pleased to be an honor to accompany you today. As we've heard in the remarks that we've just heard, we consider the authorities of the region have had to react very quickly, drawing on existing programs, adjusting, redesigning, so as to be able to address the needs of all of society, particularly those facing the most vulnerable situations. We need to consider how the pandemic has affected and will continue to affect these groups that are especially vulnerable, and this enabling us to step up the effectiveness of our joint efforts, minimize the contain and minimize the negative effects of the pandemic, and this also entails learning, making it possible to promote greater resilience. In this regard, from the OAS, we can note that through the development of our agenda in social development, well, ever since the fourth meeting of ministers and high-level authorities of social policy held in Guatemala, well, a plan of action was established, making it possible to work on an inter-American social agenda, and this, or social development agenda, and that's what we're going to be talking about in the panel today. This agenda seeks to offer objectives which, in the long run, will make it possible to recognize and to draft priority areas, approaches to work among the member countries of the OAS to promote political dialogue and inter-American cooperation in social cooperation. One important point of what was attained with the fourth Remdes was to form working groups for the first time. And today we're pleased to have representatives of the member states who head up efforts within the context of those working groups. The first presenter in this regard will be Ramon Montes Barreto. He's Director General for Monitoring and Evaluation for Development of the Secretariat for Well-Being of Mexico, and together with Canada, he heads up the first working group that is focused on multidimensional poverty. Mr. Montes is a researcher and academic, a public servant. He has published several works on public health, planning, organization, risk analysis, education, gender, poverty, and administration. And we are honored to have him today. And so I invite Mr. Montes to join us on the panel. And I would ask the presenters to stay here because after your statements, we'll be putting a question to each of you to close out the panel.
Señor Montes, si puede solicitar la palabra, por favor.
Mr. Montes, can you ask for the floor, please? Now, please activate your camera, telephone. Welcome, Doctor. Thank you very much. Good morning, distinguished Chairman of CIDE, Ambassador Maria del Carmen Roquebert, and distinguished representatives of member states, and dear colleagues, friends. I'd like to present some of the facts we have developed to deal with the different impacts that the crisis has had on women and vulnerable groups that have resulted from our experience with the COVID-19 pandemic. So I'd like to ask that my presentation be put on the screen so that I can begin. Next slide, please. Here, we have covered three topics: social protection, resilience, monitoring and evaluation, effects on vulnerable populations, and some challenges and recommendations from our perspective in having to deal with this new norm. As to social protection, before the pandemic, our government in Mexico had already increased social expenditures, as you can see in the slide. This, together with the 2020-24 National Development Plan set up by the federal government in terms of growth in social expenditures, this resulted from including new social groups under a program, Money for the Poor. The programs under the Welfare Secretariat includes money for elderly adults. That investment has quintupled by 503% since 2018. Also, we have another program called Planting Lives, which I think you've heard about because I see that other countries in Latin America are applying it. We also have a program on people with disabilities and the well-being of children of working mothers, microcredits for the well-being of persons under social emergencies or natural emergencies. In the graph, you can see how beginning in 2018, there was an increase in the budget allocated by this government to each one of the programs I've mentioned. Next slide. Resilience vis-a-vis the COVID-19 pandemic. These are the contributions from the social programs in Mexico. The Mexican policy ensured that people had a minimum level of social protection. Information and monitoring and evaluation has allowed us to continuously provide follow-up to those populations who have the biggest needs. in terms of resilience to the COVID-19 pandemic, given this human and health crisis created by COVID-19, we developed a strategy to decrease the impact on the more vulnerable groups, specifically in the economic and social arena. We developed 19 social development programs and actions, including 38 priority programs to deal with crises, giving priority to those people who live in rural areas or have greater levels of marginalization. We opted for certain categories such as violence, poverty, and marginalization. In terms of monitoring and evaluation, in addition to the increase in social expenditures, the government responded to the pandemic with a 0.7% increase in GDP in healthcare funds and direct support to homes and corporations. The IMF suggested that we increase the expenditure on social issues in 2020 to mitigate the negative impact of the pandemic on employment, sales, retail sales, and labor poverty. The percentage of the population with low income, basically. In terms of the effects on vulnerable populations, inequality affects the prospects for collective and individual growth and creates asymmetry in access to social rights. This situation was exacerbated during the pandemic and became a worldwide challenge. In spite of that, and in spite of the positive effects of the social policies, we have seen a decrease in extreme poverty in the most vulnerable populations. There's been a decrease in extreme poverty in adult persons by minus 2.7 percentage points amongst that population. I'd like to finally share this recommendation, the challenges that we are facing in the OAS and CD. Specific recommendations can be made, and training should be provided to member countries. We also developed a general coordination for federal government development programs, which has the challenge of providing aid to the more vulnerable population. Every 3 years, rather almost 3 years since the pandemic occurred, we need to focus on the existing gaps. We need to strengthen and focus programs on the most affected population in order to decrease these gaps and to streamline the information in order to detect new vulnerabilities in the population and strengthen decision making. Given this emergency, we need to consider mitigation measures and recovery measures in order to provide more fiscal collection and redistribution of fiscal income. Thank you. Thank you very much for giving us a definition in such a short period of time of all the information that is very valuable, particularly telling us about your experience in Mexico by focusing and increasing investment in social development programs, and also the continuous monitoring and assessment throughout the pandemic that has helped you come to these conclusions. We're also very pleased to see that Mexico is an important participant in the working groups and has encouraged these training initiatives. And thank you for sharing the experiences that you talked to us about in your presentation. Now I'd like to welcome Engineer Ms. Martinez, the Technical Director of the Ministry of Social Policy Coordination in the Dominican Republic. Dr. Montes, if you please stay, but I'd like to ask you to turn your microphone off. But please remain close by because we'll have some questions for you probably. Engineer Mr. Espinal chairs Group 2, the social protection system that leads social development through the reduction of poverty and inequality, and expands social protection with an integral perspective. He is an industrial engineer with a master's and postgraduate degree in economics finance, and management. Also, in addition to being a business consultant, he works with many international organizations. We'd like to welcome Mr. Espinal. Mr. Espinal, could you please ask for the floor? I don't see that Mr. Espinal is connected. Mrs. Sanchez is asking for the floor from the Dominican Republic. Oh, here we have Mr. Espinal. Hello, thank you very much. Welcome, sir. It's a pleasure, Mari Carmen. It's a pleasure to greet all of you. First of all, my apologies for the delay. That we've had technical problems in updating the software at the very last minute. It's a pleasure to speak to you in my capacity as the chairman of Working Group 2, who together with Costa Rica and Guatemala and Paraguay are working in this area. We've been working very hard and with a lot of enthusiasm on the preparation for the remdes that will be taking place in the Dominican Republic next November. And together we have been discussing each one of the thematic discussions. One of these is the workshops that will provide the major input for that meeting, that large meeting that will be hosted by the Dominican Republic with great enthusiasm next November, or November of this year. We have designed 3 workshops. The first we have called Policies and Innovation in the Area of Social Protection to Mitigate the Effects of the COVID-19 Pandemic. And we are expecting to have distinguished participants, experts in social protection from international organizations such as the ILO, ECLAC, UNDP, and the German International Cooperation Society. In that workshop, we'll have very interesting presentations and discussions by countries telling us how they dealt with COVID so that we can together develop some lessons learned and lessons that we're still learning from this unfortunate moment in mankind. A moment where science and international cooperation has helped us to slowly overcome, and we hope that soon we will be seeing full daylight once again. And the other workshops, we've been preparing the agenda in discussion with the Working Group 2 participants. So we've come up with a second workshop that will deal with the national care systems as strategies for eradicating poverty. As you know, there is one, this is one key element to confront this scourge in the poorest homes, where very often the mother or father were not able to participate in the labor market because of the internal issues within the home that keep them from working, because either have to take care of a child or a grandparent and whom they can't leave alone. And those are often problems that contribute significantly to keeping us from eradicating poverty. Another workshop will talk about social information systems and the recording of non-taxable contributions. And this is not insignificant. Taxing is a key factor for the development of social policies. And so in the Dominican Republic, where we now have a very accurate and good social information system, which has allowed us to provide follow-up and realize how valuable this information is in designing policies and setting up what we now call the single beneficiary system, SUEN. And we will now be able to look at 16 years of experience with continuous improvements to develop good practices at the hemispheric and global level on the use of this data, taking advantage of the progress made in big data and the social networks that now present us a picture which will allow us to enrich decision making. The estimated date for our first workshop will be April of this year, and it will coincide with the beginning of the work done by Group 1. So we are synchronized with them, working at the same pace, and there will be both groups will be able to influence one another, and this dynamic, supported by the technical secretariat, means that we're all on the same page, working towards the preparation for the next REMS meeting and the topics for discussion there. As to the funds that we will need, will be interpretation, so that we can involve the entire Caribbean and Latin America, so that everyone is able to participate under optimal conditions. We have developed different strategies for finding that the Dominican Republic is working on this. We have some ideas, and we think that one of the main objectives is to ensure that we have a broad participation, not only from our group, but other participants that are interested in this topic, which are so important for our societies. And of course, we are coordinating our works with Group 1 to ensure that at the end we have a team product that benefits everyone. We will be convening the relevant meetings, inviting everyone to our workshops with the support of the technical coordinator that is helping us, and we are hoping to see you participate at these workshops. We have very strong support in Group 2, and the Dominican Republic as a country is very happy to provide a lot of support, and I'm quite sure that together we will be able to complete all of the workshops that I've mentioned and end up at a very successful Rendes that will be hosted in our country. And as you know, we're always ready to welcome with open arms our brothers and sisters in Latin America and the rest of the world, since this is such an important event at this special and unusual moment in our times, something that not only our hemisphere, but all of humanity is experiencing. So thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Espinal, and thank you for giving us an overview of the work that is being done by Group 2. But as you mentioned, Group 1 has also been working on their own theme, and I think it's important to give visibility to this preparatory work so as to create interest and to make sure that other delegations participate in these workshops, participate in the group work, because it's important to take a collaborative approach, sharing experiences and bringing in different views. As you said, each social development ministry is different, has different challenges, but we're all dealing with the same population, the same needs that people have. So it's an excellent opportunity to share that, and we thank the Dominican Republic for the great enthusiasm with which they've taken on this role. Thank you, Maria Carmen. Please stay in the room as I ask Dr. Montes so that we could ask you questions after we hear the last presentation. And now we have the presentation of Mr. Camilo Cid. He is the officer in charge of the Social Development Division of the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, ECLAC. He is an economist, a master in economics from Georgetown University, and a PhD in economics from the Universität Duisburg-Essen in Germany. Previously, he was regional advisor in economics and financing of health at PAHO and WHO in Washington, D.C. for 6 years. In his country, he's held several positions in the public and academic environment. He's had several positions in the public health sector and was head of the Presidential Commission to Reform the Health System and professor at the Universidad Católica in Chile. He's also a consultant to various organizations on public health policies. Welcome. You can now ask for the floor so that you can participate. Good afternoon. Thank you very much for this invitation. And greetings to the authorities of this CD, the Inter-American Council for Social Development, for Integral Development, and to the various ministers who are present, the working groups, and all colleagues listening. With the little time I have left, I'd like to summarize the social panorama of Latin America and the Caribbean, which was published, I think, 2 weeks ago. And it covers the issues that are relevant to what we're discussing today. It's a 250-page document, so of course I can't put it up on the screen, but I will try to show a few images on my screen. But of course, it's not working now. Just a minute. Can you let me know if you can see the screen? We see it, but not, oh yes, now it's in presentation more. Okay. What I'd like to say, and that's what the report states, is that after 2 years of a pandemic, we are seeing a setback that continues to occur, and it hasn't stopped in spite of the massive vaccination. We now are seeing an expansion of the pandemic, and the population has not been fully vaccinated. In many countries, they still haven't gone beyond 70% of their population being vaccinated. And this pandemic has led to a breakdown and slowdown in public health in the countries, and it has become structural now because in spite of the economic recovery of 2021, the social crisis was not overcome. So the crisis caused by the pandemic continues to exist. We see that in unemployment, particularly amongst women, children, the informality sector. These are the most vulnerable sectors of the population. And we've seen an increase in poverty and inequality. So, for instance, in the area of poverty, extreme poverty increased for the 6th consecutive year in 2020. In 2021, we expect to see an increase in extreme poverty that will mean that 86 million people in the region will be living in extreme poverty. That is an issue of great concern because it means that the increase in poverty that we began to see in 2015 is increasing. And now it's a significant and definite increase in extreme poverty. Also, this poverty is not evenly distributed. It's very inequitable. As you can see here, it's worse in the rural areas than in the urban. It's worse in young people than in the older people. It's worse for the indigenous than for other groups of the population. It's worse for who have less education compared to those who have more education. In fact, it has even become worse for those who have completed secondary education in the region. And we have also seen inequality increase globally based on the Gini coefficients. Here you can see the regional average, which is a Gini coefficient that stopped dropping. Now we've seen an increase in inequality. And this began back in 2002. By 2020, we had seen a decrease, and now in 2020, we are seeing an increase in poverty in the region. This inequality is basically caused by the drop in income. We see here how income in the first quintile, that is amongst the poorest of the population, dropped significantly. The income from work and salaries dropped by 28% in 2020. And in the fifth quintile, it's 8.1% drop for the fifth quintile. So if you look at the emergency actions taken by governments to mitigate the impact of the crisis, the drops are less, and it helps even things out a bit. That's what you see in the other bars, where you can see if you take all incomes together, it's only dropped by 12.8%. Unemployment has been mainly affecting women. They have dropped their labor participation over the past in 2002 compared to 2020. It's been an 18% drop. And the recovery that occurred in 2021, which is projected to occur later on, is greater for men than it is for women. And if there had not been any cash transfers, which all countries implemented, poverty would have been much greater. This ECLEC projects in the report a poverty of 33.4% in 2021 had there not been the cash transfers. And so that's why poverty is not going to be 32.4, it'll be only 32.1%. But these emergency transfers were very important because it was $45 billion in 2021. And yet we've seen a significant decrease compared to 2020, where those transfers amounted to double, $89 million. And the transfers were not enough in 2021. Only one country provided transfers higher than the poverty line. 4 countries provided transfers higher than extreme poverty, and all the other countries provided transfers that were less than those levels. There was an increased amount in coverage. Almost 50% of the population received these transfers. They were mainly monetary and cash to ensure that basic services could continue. Here you can see the distribution of the transfers in the region. They were significant, and in spite of what we've said, they still were not enough. But ECLEC maintains that these have to be kept up in 2022 to avoid the impact on poverty and inequality that we've been seeing. And finally, in terms of the challenges that ECLEC sees, they have to do with working towards a sustainable well-being with the relevant participation of international collaboration. And I was asked, if I were asked to give an opinion on this and talk about the transitions development, what I would propose is to establish measurements different from just per capita consideration to evaluate countries, particularly those middle-income countries, and include other gaps that are very important in the development of a country. And that's not reflected in per capita income. I won't speak anymore because I've already exceeded my 5 minutes. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you very much. Thank you also for having presented in such a brief period of time this very exhaustive presentation, giving us a great overview of what the pandemic has meant in our region, particularly the impact it has had on populations that were in a vulnerable situation and those that have now become vulnerable populations, which shows you how dynamic the situation is as a result of the pandemic, and even as it's ending. Not only have the indicators changed, but we have seen an increase in the more vulnerable population. So now we'll have an opportunity to ask questions. So we'll hear a bit more about the measurements that now need to be taken. But we do believe that this overall information you've given us has been very enlightening on the impact the pandemic has had and what we have to do as an organization and the various working groups will have to do. Let me take a few minutes to ask one question to each one of the panelists to emphasize some of the points they mentioned, beginning with, I'll give an opportunity to Dr. Montes to connect. So I'll begin with Engineer Van Eldel. And let me ask you, what are the areas that you believe the work done by Working Group 2 has contributed to, particularly in view of the fact that the workshops and the opportunities for cooperation involve the stakeholders in the field directly. You involve those teams that work in social development in each one of the countries. So could you give us an example of one or two benefits or values that you have detected in the last few months as you've been working in this area in the Dominican Republic?
Ha estado centrada en identificar, ¿no? Los temas que...
Yes, the dynamic has been geared to identifying those issues which in practice in the hemisphere in each of our countries can have been carried out with both mistakes as well as accomplishments, to be very frank and transparent. So in that regard, the workshops that we've designed seek to draw lessons from those experiences so that they not be mere declarations or stories or precious fables, but rather they should be veritable lessons of the pandemic. And even though it might be difficult to say so, well, just as we speak in beautiful terms of what we've done right, we also are very frank about the impact and how our state, specifically our social protection program, reacted successfully and not so successfully. And oftentimes one learns even more from the mistakes. So the fundamental focus we've had, well, the dynamic is very much focused on that aspect. And the workshops, after extensive discussions, address very specific issues. They're focused on the specific issue so as to enrich the debate and so that Remdes can have input that is truly valuable for all of the participants. Thank you very much, sir. I think it's very important to hear your words, for they indicate, even in this stage, which is still one of preparation of the workshops, is an experience that has been gained after the experience and the opportunity that the dynamic actors in this process have had of being able to share experiences in the moment. I think that's important, for the dynamic has been quite fast moving and our states have had to respond very nimbly to all of the changes that have happened in the last couple of years, and being able to reflect with peers and to draw on one another's experiences is in and of itself a valuable experience. Understanding that a bit more is coming. Yes, that's right. Mr. Montes, I'd like to ask you, you were discussing how the gap has expanded in terms of those vulnerable groups, which, while they were impacted prior to the pandemic, well, with the pandemic, it's been much more visible, and how the different social protection initiatives have sought to promote these groups and promote access to equitable rights. For you mentioned that the inequality one sees, even when there are initiatives of social protection programs, what areas do you consider priorities if we had to focus on a short and medium term effort to direct the different social protection efforts? What areas have you identified that are especially important? Thank you very much for the question and for the opportunity to share with you our government's concern and the actions that we are taking aimed at groups where social asymmetries are much more visible. We consider the case of women, for example. It's always been observed that there have been lags in the workplace, and even though there's more employment, the jobs, or if not the jobs, the salaries are quite precarious, less than what men are paid for doing the same work. So we have been working with policies, well, with affirmative action policies in order to resolve that problem of inequality. In addition, among younger people, boys and girls, well, we're focusing on them because this group has also seen more precarious poverty. That's where the positive impacts of the program are focused, helping families, well, helping to make sure that the parents of those children, perhaps, through certain programs, may have an income, even if it might be temporary, as in the case of programs such as Sowing Life, Sembrando Vida, and another program that helps out children. In the pandemic, there's a microcredit program that also went forward. And it has taken an initiative to make sure that people, well, now that they have work and pay that microcredit, well, this is paid into the program's trust. There's no longer a federal budget line item, but rather they do get the money from the families who have been made those loans, those families that were in the most vulnerable situations. So that is what I can share with you, Maria Carmen. But I'd also like to take this opportunity, since my colleague Van Elder Espinal spoke about Working Group 2, I want to say something about Working Group 1. I'd like to take this opportunity to inform all of you that there's some actions that we have planned as of in February of 2021. You'll recall that we made a proposal and a work plan for 2022 of CDAs, and it was adopted by the Partnership for Cooperation Policy Working Group in a meeting held in April 2021. That work plan is the result of a joint effort to be coordinated with the OAS. So I'd like to acknowledge all of the support we've received from you, from the Department of Social Inclusion and the Secretariat for Equity and Inclusion. We have planned a virtual workshop called Indices of Multidimensional Poverty, Best Practices and Lessons Learned in the region in the COVID-19 pandemic. We've planned to hold this in April, next April, though we haven't yet specified the date. We will be inviting the member countries of the OAS with due lead time so that they can participate and expound on their experiences in this area. We also plan to publish, as a result of this meeting, a compendium of experiences on measuring poverty in the region, as certain methodologies have been integrated to make these measurements, and what kinds of indicators are used by the different countries in this process. And soon, with the support of the Technical Secretariat, we'll be sending you a questionnaire, and we invite you to participate in this initiative, which we consider important. So I did want to take this opportunity to inform you and to invite you. Thank you. Thank you very much. More than, well, your comments most welcome and timely. And we'd urge the delegations to join the work of Working Group 1 so as to not lag behind Working Group 2. Finally, Camilo, having the context somewhat and having heard of the work that the groups are doing, focusing on the states that have some, in one way or another, identified a roadmap. If you could give us some recommendation in terms of some concepts on how to best incorporate best practices on measurement and this work of cooperation and dialogue among the states. You already mentioned one, beginning to put on the table the reality that the indicators aren't the same for everyone, and understand how we can draw on concepts such as this in the work being done by the working groups. Mr. Seed, you are muted. We can't hear you. I'm sorry, that tends to happen. Well, no doubt measurement is important. Here at ACLAC, there are several approaches with the crisis and the analysis. For example, the social analysis unit and the social development. We all understand that the approach must be and the perspective must be integrated. First of all, to address and understand equality, it's important to understand the different situations. So it's important to look not only at averages, but also the actual situations and how these indicators have evolved. There are different indicators for mother and child care, children, women, and so among those that draw our attention are those on women, the impact not only in terms of salaries, but also on the capacity to generate income, which has become an important indicator for the feminization or non-feminization of the labor market. This is extremely relevant. I don't have the figure off the top of my head. It's in the report about how women stopped generating income or lost a significant part of their capacity to generate income, and at the same time how that is related to the world that women return to, going back to the household where they need to provide care. That is very important, and where they also have to take charge of the fact that the children aren't in school. So looking at details such as this is quite important, for then there you can have a more precise notion of vulnerabilities. And this can be established in respect of other vulnerable groups as well, having to do with race, ethnicity, territories, or geography. The geographic differences in terms of impact of the pandemic is quite important as well. And sometimes the contagion is exacerbated, might not be so known. If there's overcrowding in cities, this led to very serious situations. Well, we all know the case of Peru, for example. Well, not being able to comply with the quarantine and at the same time not having what is necessary at home so as to be able to stay home. Well, so people had to go out and work in very small spaces, housing. And this notably expanded the pandemic. And this led Peru to have among the highest rates of infection in the world. So it is very important to look at these issues of vulnerability and to establish these measurements or these indicators that can describe, and that, well, some of them are new. They've been generated during this process, and no doubt they have to continue to be looked at and built and maintained over time. Thank you. Thank you very much. I think that with this, we take away a very specific approach or focus in terms of the importance of being able to work on information with an integrated perspective in terms of access to rights, particularly with a gender perspective. I think this is extremely important, but also understanding that one must offer a detailed analysis of those groups that perhaps have not been so visible over time because of their particularities and other components. For example, this issue of overcrowding, which should lead to an intersectional analysis because it brings together groups that are not necessarily homogeneous, rather that are marked by some heterogeneity. So I think that with this foundation, we take away some important recommendations. Once again, I'd like to thank the chair for the opportunity to moderate this panel from the Secretariat to Rights and Equity in the Department of Social Inclusion. We continue to collaborate with all of the work related to this social development agenda. We hope to be able to see you once again as the work of the groups goes forward, and with a view to the REMDES meeting to be held at the end of this year. So once again, I thank you, and I give the floor back to the chair. I'd like to thank the panelists for their interesting presentations and considerations. Also, Secretary Plata, we very much value the information provided by the Dominican Republic in the lead up to the meeting of ministers and other high-level authorities on social policy, also, or social development. Also, the very important reports that we've heard from Mexico, which is in charge of work group number 1, highlighting, above all else, the deepening of gender gaps, which and the director of ACLAC just gave us very up-to-date information about the masculinization, so to speak, of employment recovery. And this is a piece of information we need to take stock of. And 18-year setback in the employability of women with the setback of the pandemic, having just celebrated the Inter-American Day of Women of the Americas, which coincides with the marking of the founding of the SIM. Well, this is very important, very compelling data that we need to take charge of. In other words, the agenda on reducing inequality and gender gaps. Well, this we need to bring to the fore of the agenda of the OAS and of the states. So thank you for this very fruitful and valuable information, and no doubt we'll continue working with it in this committee, in this commission. And I now offer the floor to any delegations who wish to share their national experiences in this area or on this topic. I see, first of all, the delegation of Ecuador. Ecuador, you have the floor. How are you? Good morning. Thank you so much for giving me the floor. I'd like to congratulate all of the speakers. Today, I would like to discuss a program that is quite important, very important, that we have at the Ministry of Social Inclusion of Ecuador, focused on public policy that seeks to generate this equality or these opportunities for women. To give you an idea, we work with persons affected by vulnerability, poverty, and extreme poverty, people who live or who get by on $5 a week. And the Ministry of Economic and Social Inclusion of Ecuador gives over about 1.4 million people in such vulnerable circumstances $50 monthly. But through that, we also, or in addition to that, we have other programs as well. And with the Minister Esteban Bernal and the public policy of our President Guillermo Lasso, we have wanted to work on a program which we launched in October of last year. This is an integrated program for women's development. To share some data with you, in Ecuador, 65 interpreter notes. Sound is breaking up, and one of every 4 women have suffered abuse. That is why we have created this program, which I'm going to project in just a moment. Fernando, could we help the Assistant Secretary show the video? Yes, we can do that from here. We see it in presentation mode. You see it? Okay. I can show it from here and you can tell me when to change. Fine. As I had mentioned, this is the Violet Impetus program, Impulso Violeta, to give you an idea. At the Ministry on Economic and Social Inclusion, there are several assistant secretariats. There's a Vice Ministry for Social Inclusion and a Vice Ministry for Economic Inclusion. Today, we're going to focus on the social part, but the program has an economic and social component, so we want to be able to share that with you as well. Next. Basically, we have 5 main lines where we look at employability. Number 1 is training and entrepreneurship. Number 2 is prevention of violation of rights. 3rd, community gardens and livestock enterprises. 4th is tying into commerce. And 5th is employability. As I mentioned, this program is focused primarily on women who are in vulnerable circumstances, who receive some type of cash transfer. We provide different sorts of allowances to different groups of women, and we also seek to do away with all forms of violence and gender-based violence and discrimination. Next. Now, for the main line of trainings, we have several topics. As you can see, there's technical training, strategy of articulation with the Ministry of Education, to have young women get have a stronger program than digital marketing, financial education, gastronomy, enterprise, and digital tools. And as of 2025, we believe that we're going to have had an impact on at least 6,600 women. Now, in mainline number 2 on prevention of violation of rights, at the Ministry of Economic and Social Inclusion, we have any number of experts or technical personnel in the territories, and they also engage in follow-up. Here, under this point 2, we seek to train our own personnel. We're talking about, for 2025, more than 17,000 people. Why? Because it's important for our technical personnel to be trained in issues of violation of rights and eradication of violence and gender-based rights, because at different points, cases come up that are quite common, and they need to know how to respond, or they need to know what our rights are, or what their rights are, so as to be able to provide advice to these women. Now, under the main line number 3, when we talk about community gardens and the livestock enterprises, we're saying that the Secretariat for Child Development seeks to have these women heads of household, have them have gardens in their homes. to have this income. Sometimes we understand $50 may well not be enough, and they don't have work. So we are trying to figure out how, through these family gardens and these trainings in livestock, well, for them to know how they can manage this, to be able to have some supplemental income, sell it to their friends, so that these can be an attractive option in the communities. And this is work that would be done together with the ministry and obviously the technical personnel who would provide follow-up for 2025. We anticipate that the impact will be on more than 34,000 women, so that they have these gardens and these this entrepreneurship in animal husbandry. Now, as I had mentioned, the Ministry of Economic and Social Inclusion works with women of different ages, including older women. The idea is to inject dynamism into the rural economy, strengthen technical knowledge. What we seek is to work through the Ministry of Agriculture and obviously with the municipalities in each sector so that they could be given seed and plant them in the community gardens. For 2025, we anticipate that we'll have an impact on more than 14,000 adult women. Next. Now, under main line 4, this is where we talk about the tie into commerce. Why is this important? Well, while enterprises that are managed and that we work with here at the Ministry of Economic and Social Inclusion, well, these are run by persons who face vulnerabilities, people who are living in extreme poverty and poverty. With the $50, it's often not enough, but we give out loans, two types, community and individual. Individual, well, we provide approximately $600, and the associative ones, well, in this case, two people may have a joint enterprise, then we're talking about $1,200. In this case, the women for the tie into commerce, well, the idea is to invest this money in products that they can sell. Through where? Through special fairs, which are spaces for commercial inclusion. What are we seeking? Well, that by 2025, through this program, Impulso Violeta, we will reach approximately 2,196 women. That is the impact we are seeking, precisely because we believe that the lack of income, the lack of resources, does not enable them to be able to invest in a locale or to generate something that goes beyond small and medium enterprises. So we give them this modest aid, which is really great assistance for them to be able to have that initial contact with distributors, with consumers, and obviously to get to know these products firsthand. And finally, line number 5, we're talking about employment. As we mentioned, we'd worked with persons who have disabilities, and often because of their situation beyond the pandemic, which has had such a major impact, opportunities are reduced for this target group. So we are seeking to form a partnership with different private companies through labor certifications. These are public institutions that are quite important in our country, and the idea is that by 2025, more than 1,400 women would have employment in these private enterprises, so long as these are women with disabilities. That is it. That's my presentation. Thank you so much for this opportunity. And I want to provide this as an example, mostly so that you might want to replicate in your countries, for there's so much to do. We just have experienced a pandemic that has left us with so many problems, but the Ecuadorian state, with the vision of our president, Guillermo Lasso, and the vision of our minister, Esteban Bernal, well, we are working with academia, with private enterprise, and the public sector to help close this gap of opportunities. Thank you very much. Thank you, Assistant Secretary Burgos, for your participation. I now offer the floor to the delegate of Chile. Thank you very much, Madam Chair, thank you for this session, and I thank the presenters for their presentations. As a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, the region has been facing a health crisis that's had a profound impact on the economy, food security, and related conditions, particularly the most vulnerable. This is particularly in respect to the most vulnerable sections of the population. During 2021 and 2022 thus far, the challenge in the case of Chile has been to find ways of supporting and providing a timely response to the needs of the most vulnerable persons in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. When the pandemic was imminent, it was possible to adjust the programs and benefits that are part of the intersectoral social protection system in order to give continuity to the services and accompany citizens. In addition, there was design and implementation of particular strategies to mitigate the impact of 2019 on the most vulnerable populations or those at risk of falling into poverty, reinforcing social protection and the COVID strategy for women, older adults, and persons with disabilities. While initially some of the services continued to be provided in a face-to-face basis, there was also an attempt to reach groups remotely, even though they didn't often have connectivity, even though most of the procedures were digital. This required that the process be simpler so that people could actually gain access to the social services and support provided by the Social Protection Network. And that is how, Madam Chair, it was necessary to make a number of changes in order to make this more expeditious. Automating attention to citizens, facilitating distance connections, and avoiding face-to-face contact so that assistance could get out more quickly in light of the health emergency. In addition, there was adaptation of programs to continue providing support and accompaniment to children and adolescents and their families. And adaptations to address the pandemic, well, one sought to adapt contingencies to make them effective contributions to social development or social support and to avoid violation of children. Madam Chair, in times such as these, it is very important to strengthen the bases of an intersectoral system for social protection that provides the different vulnerable groups relevant, timely opportunities with public value so as to specifically contribute to overcoming poverty, diminishing conditions of vulnerability, and improving living conditions. To that end, hemispheric coordination is an opportunity to learn about experiences that help design policies geared to attaining greater levels of equity, particularly mitigation and recovery in the post-pandemic period, effectively responding to the needs of the population, assuming and the differential impact based on gender, age, and so forth. We thank you for convening this meeting, and we appreciate the dialogue that has been unfolding. Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
I would like to thank Chile, and I call on the delegation of El Salvador. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. We thank you for having brought up this very important issue for discussion, and I'd like to thank the panelists who have reminded us that the strengthening of our social protection system is a fundamental undertaking to counter the effects of the pandemic, which has disproportionate impact on the vulnerable groups. On February 20th, we celebrated the International Day for Social Justice, and in 2022, an appeal was made to deal with the informal economy that was deepened by the crisis, given the loss of millions of jobs that mainly affected women and youth, thereby increasing the levels of poverty and lack of protection. We are at a inflection point for public policies to promote decent work and universal protection as measures needed for the economic and social recovery of our countries. Along these lines, the government of El Salvador has implemented short, medium, and long-term programs to create a resilient recovery in all areas and solve structural programs which for years have led to poverty and inequality, and given priority to improving the living standards of Salvadorian homes, improving opportunities, and coordinating social protection measures with a differentiated approach, which takes into account the specific needs of women and groups in more vulnerable situations, particularly an increase to minimum salary by 20%, recovery of 100% of the jobs lost because of the pandemic, creation of loans and financing for the economic recovery of Salvadorian companies. And thanks to this effort, about 27,000 small, medium-sized businesses, many headed by women, were strengthened with loans amounting to $139.2 million. The reestablishment of a roadmap to improve food distribution in a sustainable, equitable manner that it gives greater access to consumption and use of improved food for the population, making flexible payment for services such as water and electricity, the granting subsidies for portable computers to teachers and students with a free connection to the internet to reduce the digital gap in health. And in health, we were able to develop a successful vaccination strategy that has led to 10 million doses applied, and more than 72% of the population is fully vaccinated. Other state institutions have also been working in coordination to develop agreements and strengthen the empowerment of women through actions that promote their economic autonomy through the education, the Chica products, giving them free, non-reimbursable grains. And we have adapted internal mechanisms to improve the specialized care for women who are victims of violence, to promote equality and in all those areas that would allow women to develop their full potential without fear of inequality in all stages of life. It's also important to note the initiatives for comprehensive development of early childhood, such as the policy entitled Growing Together, which ensures that children are cared for, and the baby is cared for from gestation to school age in the areas of health, food, culture, and protection of rights. All of these have been addressed. Madam Chair, today, more than ever, the protection of social, economic, cultural, environmental rights are all the more important in order to be able to recover from the pandemic in a resilient manner. We need to strengthen these actions in order to continue building an inter-American social development agenda guided by the Plan of Action of Guatemala as the roadmap to help us attain comprehensive integral social systems that allow us to eradicate poverty, particularly extreme poverty, and eliminating inequality in all dimensions. Thus, the OAS, through these spaces and its specialized agencies, need to continue promoting the exchange of experiences and cooperation among states, as well as providing technical support and keeping in mind the importance of having the necessary resources to implement this and give it follow-up. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you. I thank the delegate of El Salvador, and now I call on the delegation of Paraguay. Thank you, Madam Chair. The delegation of Paraguay would like to thank you for having convened this session and highlights the importance of the topic that we are discussing. I also would like to thank the interventions and experiences shared by the authorities of Panama, Uruguay, Mexico, Dominican Republic, and ECLAC, and convey our authorities at the Ministry of Social Development's greeting. Madam Chair, the effects of the pandemic have affected all our countries, including Paraguay. And we would like to share with you some of the successful experiences undertaken by the Ministry for Social Development in Paraguay, keeping in mind that we work with families that are poor and vulnerable throughout different programs. The commitment became even greater during the pandemic, and thus we had to reinvent ourselves and yet not lose sight of the goals of the programs in effect. but we had to adjust to an emergency and create a vision that was sustainable for the citizenship. We could not just provide specific assistance, but ensure the actions were sustainable over time and ensure that we strengthened the skills of the families with whom we work. Thus, we, under the program Te Kopora, which in Guarani means to live well, and which is a program for cash transfers with co-responsibility, we developed a project called My Garden to reactivate the economy and provide food safety. This was one of the responses that we began in May of 2020. This project was a response to alleviate the impact of the pandemic on the food problems, which occurred as a result of lack of financial income to feed the family. The La Huerta, my garden, is the main part of the project. The family is able to grow the vegetables they need to eat and possibly sell any surplus and change and increase it to bring about greater income. We use techniques using the efficient use of water, protection against cold, taking care of the plants, and using insecticides and caring for the plants. We provided the families with the necessary funds so that the Tecopora families could have a garden that would allow them to supplement their family's consumption. And we provided training which allowed them to make the project sustainable. The impact of the project, which was carried out in 3 departments inside the country, came to a total of 34,913 heads of home, women heads of home, reaching a population of 170,551 persons and 81,739 children under the age of 18. Finally, Madam Chair, the delegation of Paraguay would like to express our support for the preparatory work being done by countries in an effort to come up to develop the 5th meeting of ministers and upper authorities for social development. Thank you, Paraguay. Now call on the Director of Social Assistance of Guatemala, Lourdes Fon. You have the floor, madam. Good afternoon, good morning, distinguished authorities of the OAS and ECLAC and ministers and presenters, panelists. I have the honor of speaking to you about the project at the Ministry of Social Development. Just to give you some background, the Ministry of Social Development was set up in 2012. And through the ministry, we have implemented several policies and social protection measures, amongst them social support programs, such as different programs, such as the conditional cash transfers that target poor and extremely poor populations, as well as vulnerable populations, such as women, who have very young children at home, and the interventions for social promotion and social problem prevention through various programs such as the food stamp card, the food cafeterias where there's a shortage of food or incomplete supplies. When the pandemic hit us in 2019, we were able to detect certain weaknesses that exist in the country, and it highlighted several social and economic problems in our country. But through the coordination at the interinstitutional level and through the participation of the private sector, banking companies, and legislature of the country, we were able to coordinate and set up several measures. One was under our responsibility, which was the program called Family Vouchers. It was a program that had a very positive social and economic impact in the country. We had the coverage of about 2,500,000 families, and the coverage was national in scope. These vouchers helped to mitigate a bit the economic crisis that had been felt until then, particularly amongst the vulnerable populations. This project meant that in 1 to 2 months, we were able to provide this assistance to the families affected by the pandemic as a result of other measures the government had developed. And the vouchers ensured that those people that did not have enough money or had lost their jobs or were involved in the informal sector no longer had the income they had. And as a result of this intervention, these people were able to receive economic assistance. The program implemented several innovative measures. One was the digital platform, which is a very high-tech platform that helped us develop a program with the assistance of international organizations. We were able to develop a program where the users could come and unlike the ministry's former programs, which required coming to register and appear in person and etc. But now through this new platform, the users were able to sign up remotely, and we were able to accreditate them, and all of it was done virtually, especially because of the pandemic crisis. It was a much more dynamic and effective intervention, therefore. One of the challenges presented by this voucher program was, how do you obtain data from different institutions? How do you get key information, such as how do you identify the vulnerable populations? These were all challenges that we had to address. And as a result of this, as a result of the pandemic, we realized there were these weaknesses, and we're working to correct them so that the social protection actions can become more direct, more immediate in time when there is a crisis that arises. Another innovation of this Bono Familia family voucher was the economic platforms that were developed, which allowed people to have access through call centers or through could sign up for it. Another innovation was the payment mechanisms. No longer did they get paid through banks or agencies, but rather through ATMs and points of sale, and because usually the populations that are covered by the ministry were not used to these methods, but now they've learned how to use them. And we had never had such a project that covered such a large population in such a short period of time. About 74 million persons, families, where we receive support through this program of the 2 million I mentioned earlier. Of course, the ministry's programs had to adapt to this new situation. Some were unable to implement their measures quickly because of security measures or because they needed in-person meetings with the beneficiaries. But they were able to adapt to other systems, such as setting up lunch rooms where people and families could come immediately to benefit. In the case of the conditional cash transfers, under the law adopted by Congress, it stated that there was a state of disaster calamity, and therefore it was possible to give conditional cash transfers directly to the families without having them being subjected to measuring and determine what is the co-responsibility measurement, as often occurred with the other education programs and food programs that existed in the past. Since people could not be present in person, the state of disaster law that we could provide this to the families remotely, which meant that a large number of families were helped with 38 million in cash transfers. This situation also brought to light other problems. For instance, how do you improve help and assistance in the areas of health and education, particularly in the area of education, because the children couldn't go back to school right away. In fact, even this year, not all schools have been able to open up again. And so kids were not in school in person. And because of the problems that the vulnerable populations have, not everyone has been able to adapt to a virtual method of education. So we've had to adopt measures to overcome that. But all of these challenges have actually led us to improve our methodologies, and we are now open to any support that could be coordinated with other OAS member countries. In some, this is has been Guatemala's experience. Thank you very much. Thank you, Director, for your contribution. I am sure we will continue to see you face to face over the year as we discuss these issues. The Director Van Elder Espinal from the Dominican Republic has the floor. Thank you very much once again for letting me share with you our experience in the Dominican Republic with these other distinguished participants and panelists. We sent a presentation. I see it's up there. I hope that everyone can see it. I can. Let me now give this presentation. In the Dominican Republic, particularly in the Office of Social Policy, in view of the impact that COVID had on the income of the most vulnerable and poorest families in the country, as a palliative measure adopted to confront this crisis, we set up in the social protection network direct income measures called subsidy stay home. The social policy office implemented this under the support of the presidency. All of this was a complement to the existing program that had been in place for about 10 years, which together with ADES, which is the Dominican office that manages social subsidies and is responsible for the social subsidy payments, which allows for electronic fund transfers, and had more than a year of experience, a decade of experience in this. So as a result, next slide, please. As a result of this, we ended up expanding on a horizontal and vertical basis, on a temporary basis, the social protection program that existed. And so we extended the number of homes benefiting from 8,500 that we had been dealing with earlier under the program called Prosole, Superate, and we now expanded it to 1.5 million homes. We also increased the monthly quota received by each home, giving priority to the most vulnerable homes, those with elderly people or young children. We had to, of course, depend on the technology to expand the different ways of making payments, which traditionally had been done through a debit card with a magnetic strip. And what we did innovative was that we used the personal ID, the cedula of a family, to obtain a payment. This way we were able to distribute the money quickly in a timely fashion to have the money to mitigate the impact caused by the drop in income. We also were able to expand the number of establishments within what we call in the Dominican Republic the social supply network, which basically means a network of private establishments for the poor, which allows the users to buy goods, basically food, as close as possible to their own home, so that there's a much more cost-efficient transaction and much more reasonable. Let me mention here some of the expenditures involved. The social expenditures were equivalent to $1.7 million. And one was an expenditure for social assistance, that is the cash transfers, non-conditional, in other words, just for the purpose of mitigating lack of income. And of that amount, it's about 2.2 million, which is a certain percentage of the total expenditure. The subsidy called Stay at Home, Quédate en Casa, that's how we called this package, meant that in addition to the traditional one, we went from 800,000 families that existed pre-pandemic. We now increased it to 1.5 million, which is almost 6 to 8 times the original subsidy. So it went from 4.8 to 6,800. And for the first quintil, it was an increase in 22.9% and 32.1% increase in homes with elderly. The establishments with the subsidy called Eat First increased from 4,800 to 6,800 businesses. And in an extraordinary matter, we also opened up large-scale businesses, in this case, wholesale supermarkets, so that as to ensure greater access of families to food. As you know, in the Dominican Republic, COVID led to a drop in the family income, as occurred elsewhere in the world, which means that the middle income families went from 35%, that is $10 to $50, to only 29%, which is a drop of almost 20%. The population that was vulnerable with moderate poverty or extreme poverty, the income went from $10 per day and represented 70% of the population, according to the Ministry of Economics. Quédate en casa, stay at home, as a program specifically ended in April 2021. And in order to keep up the subsidy and take into account the fiscal possibilities of the Dominican Republic, the subsidy called Comer Primero was replaced by another one called Alimentate, feed yourself, which has not only led to a change in name, but it has doubled the transfer. It's increased from 1,650 pesos monthly, which went from about $14.7 to about $28.4 per month. That is almost double the amount received previously. And finally, I wanted to share with you the major challenges we have before us. Even though on some of them we've been working on before the pandemic, but they've become much more obvious. We have accelerated the process of restructuring the institutional architecture for social protection, which has led to rethinking the entire structure so that we can ensure that it will be able to respond to the challenges brought forth by the current pandemic and future pandemics. And we have tried to modernize the social protection system so that it can become more resilient in facing the challenges of the future, which are no longer so much in the future. We seeing an increase in the pandemic. As you know, Bill Gates has said we're soon going to see another pandemic. So one of the objectives was to modernize the social protection system, make it more resilient, adapt it more to future needs, and also improve the mechanisms for focusing on and identifying the beneficiaries for these programs, through cash or non-cash methods, by modernizing the system's single beneficiary unit. It'll move from a single beneficiary unit to one that we call Suben Plus or Suben 2.0, because now it covers about a fifth of setup. We're also working on modernizing the social subsidy payment system to increase the coverage in a reliable manner to a greater number of beneficiaries, and have both vertical and horizontal expansion to become more efficient and ensuring cost effectiveness in handling these subsidies in our country in a feasible manner.
Integrado, más eficiente.
Finally, establish a more integrated, more efficient monitoring and evaluation system so as to take stock in the most expeditious possible manner and of the situation, and thereby make it possible to establish policies, make it possible to also adjust policies so that they can be more targeted and more effective. In this way, we summarize some of the main experiences we've had, and of course, at another time and in another scenario, we'll be able to share more, as well as to hear about the Latin American experience, which for everyone in this hemisphere, everyone worldwide, is of the utmost interest. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Director Espinal, for your participation in as we take remarks from the member states. I now offer the floor to our colleague from Costa Rica, Ambassador Solano. You have the floor. Good morning, everyone. Ambassador, I'm so pleased to see you chairing this meeting. I'm so grateful that we've been able to include this important topic on the agenda for today. We're also grateful for the presentations we've heard. We know that discussions such as this Just a second, let me close out an audio that I don't know if you're hearing this. If you hear something, if you hear an echo, thanks very much. Our region has suffered the negative impact of the pandemic. What began as a health crisis has become a global threat on any number of fronts, a global threat on any number of fronts, and it's had very serious consequences when it comes to being able to attain the goals, the Sustainable Development Goals. Madam Chair, from Costa Rica, we would like to be able to share with you some of the measures that we have now included in our social assistance system. We have had occasion to mention the Proteger or Protect bond or payment. This was a temporary aid, temporary assistance for persons who were unemployed, whose labor situation had been negatively impacted, and also for self-employed informal sector workers who were also very hard hit by the pandemic. And these have been efforts on our part to somewhat mitigate the disproportionate increase in poverty indicators. Together with this initiative, we also have two others that were implemented as of March. I'd briefly like to share this national care policy and its action plan. We established both documents with the objective of taking a position on care as a right. This in order to strengthen the services and quality standards that already exist. We also see this as a niche in the labor market, having to do with care with technical training through our national technical training institutes. And another approach is to support the inclusion and economic inclusion and autonomy of women, which, as we all know, have been very hard hit. Unemployment indicators, as indicated by the presentations, well, women have seen a 20-year setback in employment. The second initiative we've discussed with you here in some other forums is the Territorial Economic Strategy for an Inclusive and Decarbonized Economy 2020-2050. What we mean to say with this is beyond the metropolitan area of San Jose, in order to reduce the structural gaps in areas far off from the capital in respect of technological innovation, education, employment, the idea being to create greater job opportunities, and particularly to work on specific issues such as infrastructure, connectivity, human capital, social inclusion, economic development, and decarbonization. We have, or carbon reduction. We've also identified a number of challenges. We've identified the need to consolidate unemployment insurance. This would mean expanding coverage offered by the current Social Security system. And second, strengthening labor inspections. This would be an important step in order to uphold labor rights and reduce informality in the labor force, both with the view to development and social justice. Recalling that last 20 February, we marked the International Day of Social Justice. Madam Chair, we know that we need to have well-informed solutions in both the medium and long term in order to rethink public policies that make it possible to generate dignified jobs and better living conditions for persons. We must now expand the social protection system so that we can attain inclusive and sustainable economic growth, making emphasis on a differentiated response, which is required to address those specific needs of our populations. And once again, I note that women, particularly women heads of households, have been so hard hit. There have been social barriers that have stood in the way of half of these women of the economically active population being able to access remunerated jobs. Their incorporation to the labor market would represent not only an increase in their economic autonomy, it would also translate into cutting poverty in half, and there would be corresponding greater contributions to our social security system. That's why we also thank Mr. Seed for his mention of the concept of development in transition, which Costa Rica requested of the ECOWAC Secretariat when it served as President Pro Tem. This document speaks of cooperation that needs to adapt, as we've mentioned in other circumstances, to the specific needs of the countries and seek to address the structural development gaps through more cutting-edge approaches that are less traditional multi-level, as between both traditional actors and new partners with different approaches, such as horizontal cooperation, regional cooperation, south-south, north-south, north-south-south-north, and triangular. This would also enable us to identify new financing tools such as climate change funds, combined or blended funding, debt for nature, debt for environment swaps, and of course, mobilizing different resources domestically. With this approach, we are of the view that development, seen as a multi-dimensional and uninterrupted process, would enable the countries to achieve a certain per capita level in various dimensions with sustainable accomplishments. This concept is complementary to implementation of the 2030 Agenda, for it proposes a turn in cooperation that would facilitate and serve as a catalyst for development processes. Our commitment is to continue to work arduously for social justice. As Vice Chair of Group Number 2 of the Inter-American Commission for Social Development, CIDES, which is chaired by the Dominican Republic, and for that reason we're so grateful to Director Espinal for the valuable presentation we just heard. Well, together with them and the support of the members, of course, we will try to use this approach in the work of CIDES and to try to leave a mark on that important work that is done. We thank you, and we also urge, or we thank the member states for their interventions. We urge the SEDE and the SADI for their and the different groups of experts for the contributions they brought us today. Thank you so much, Madam Chair. Thank you, Ambassador. There being no other delegation seeking the floor, I propose that CD take note of the very important presentations made by Minister Castillo of Panama, Minister Lema of Uruguay, as well as the informative, excuse me, I see, and I hadn't realized it, that Ambassador Everson Hull of St. Kitts and Nevis, Chair of the Permanent Council, has asked for the floor. I'm so sorry, Ambassador, you for not having noticed. You do have the floor.
Ambassador, could you please request the floor again?
Perdón, era...
Sí, era el embajador, le di la palabra, pero...
Yes, it was the ambassador. I gave him the floor, but then he left.
A lo mejor fue un...
Perhaps. Well, once the chair of the Permanent Council wishes to take the floor. Ah, there he is.
Thank you very much. No, pardon me for the delay. I'd like to thank Ambassador Rockebeer for putting on that very impressive panel. It was very, very very informative, and I did not want to miss the opportunity for actually offering a comment. I am really very much impressed with much of the forces, the ideas that have been expressed. But there's one thing that I think that might be missing, that I think that I'd like to see the group focus on to some degree. We have really not focused on the individual. We've spoken a great deal about groups and what they need to do, And we really should indeed, in my view, think that we should really try to focus to some extent on the individual and try to introduce measures that would motivate that individual to perform at his highest level. When he shows up to work each day, it would be nice for him to have 5 goals and objectives in his hand, that if he pursues them at the very highest level, he would receive a reward, a compensation over and above his base salary. That would be very important for the individual to be motivated when he comes to work each day. I think that's missing, because if we continue to pay each person the identical paycheck, there is really no incentive for him to outperform his peers. So there will really be no motivation for going out and being innovative and creative in producing highly valued goods and services that will increase the income level. The gentleman from CELAC, I think it's Camilo Sid, his group at ECLAC has produced a very important data that relates to the decline in productivity that has occurred over the last 29 years. It's pretty much uninterrupted. It's a fairly steady decline. It's fairly severe. There are very important implications of that, because what it means, therefore, is that the flow of income from foreign direct investment is going to pretty much dry up, and the attendant levels of income that would be associated with it would also collapse, and so too would be the levels of poverty. I think a lot starts right there. And if Camilo Sid would be able to offer a brief comment on that before we close, I think that would be most helpful. Because we really need to get that individual showing up to work each day to be the best that he can possibly be. We have benefits that are rewarded to athletics. The person who wins the 100 yards dash, he's going to get a bonus or a reward. Both in the public and private sectors, we have incentives. In the U.S. government, there's an Office of Personnel Management that has an incentive-based compensation program. It's also one that exists in Canada. But that program motivates each individual when he shows up to work, no matter what level he is, whether it's at the CEO level or down to the lowest level, it motivates that individual to push a little harder. I believe that's missing across our region, and I really would like to see more attention given to that. But on balance, it's a very, very good program that has been put together. We will have the council will be having a meeting on March the 9th, would further address this issue. We had a very good program on February 9th, which addressed the decline in productivity, starting out with the decline that was reflected in the ECLAC presentation. We're going to follow that up now, because the experts that we brought in from the World Bank and others gave a very good explanation as to why this productivity was going. We would like now on March the 9th to come back on this now and ask, what steps do we take to increase the productivity and to increase income levels? So thanks again very much for allowing me to be squeezed in at this moment, Ambassador Rokabir. I appreciate that a great, great deal. Thank you very much.
I'm not certain whether the panelists are still connected and whether Director Seed could offer a brief comment. Recall, we will be following up on all of this in the joint sessions that we have planned with the Chair of the Permanent Council. And we also still have some more points of our agenda to get through. So I ask if Director Seed is connected and could offer a comment. Yes, he's asking for the floor. Very well. Thank you very much, Director Seed. Thank you, and thank you for that recent comment. The truth is that, as I said at the outset, it's difficult to take stock of the full report, but the gentleman made a point on the individual effects, or effects on individuals. In that context, it's important, we did mention, that some social protection measures, well, a small part in principle, refer to inclusion in the workplace, having to do with the situation of workers. The idea was such measures should not be merely transitory, but that they should become structural and that they could seek to boost the capacity of workers in the world of work. And the countries understood this, and they understood this. So from 2020 to 2021, there was a threefold increase in transfer measures that were geared to labor or workplace inclusion. In cash transfers in particular, these were training, information, adaptation, with a view to getting recovering employment, which is so important for the economy. Another relevant aspect in that case, no doubt, and we were also talking about this new approach to international cooperation. Obviously, the economies of the region in this, I'm sorry, in this development transition, there is approach. There's talk of four traps in the economy. One of these, or pits or traps falls, one of these is that of productivity. We have economies with low productivity, primarily because they are based on extractive production, very little value added into the value chain, so not much value added, and that's one of the important traps or pitfalls of middle to income countries. There's also the trap of vulnerability, which we've been discussing more on the social side, and the trap of institutional framework in the sense that have the difficulty or inability to have efficient, stable institutions that succeed in setting the rules over a relevant period of time or a long period of time, so as to develop certain fundamental aspects of both the economic and social. And then there's the environmental trap or pitfall, which it can also be addressed through technology, through productivity. It's a very interesting matter. Indeed, we focus on more social issues. Nonetheless, there is a connection of social policy or social protection, which also is integrated into economic policy, economic and productive policy. And as I say, it has to be an overall view that allows for mutual reinforcement, this in order to help with the country's development. Thank you so much, sir. As chair, and I believe the whole team is very pleased with this high-level discussion that we have had today. And part of the purpose is precisely to continue sparking such discussions and going deeper into that interconnection of all the different areas for the integral development of the region. Since we need to now move on to other items, I would also like to thank Secretary Maria Carmen Plata and the teams and experts for preparing this meeting, and the full Secretariat for Integral Development for supporting for the key support for the work of CD. With this takes us to the next item on our agenda. And as you know, to organize our work, we have drawn up a work plan for the coming months of this chair. This is CD Doc 3340/22, and this was presented in the meeting held 25 January last. Since then, a request was received from the delegation of Trinidad and Tobago to include the declaration of the renewed commitment with respect to post-COVID in the Americas, and that request was included in the revised version, which I now put to you for your consideration. The delegations that wish to speak have the floor. Thank you very much. There being no delegation seeking the floor, we can understand. Oh, I'm sorry, Mexico. I'm sorry, the delegation of Mexico has the floor. Thank you very much. Can you hear me and see me? They seem to be having some connectivity issues. Well, thank you very much, Madam Chair. First of all, greetings on behalf of Ambassador Lucelena Baños. She apologizes that she's not able to be here in this very important meeting that she has another commitment that she couldn't get away from. But she's asked me to convey this message to you. First of all, thanks and congratulations to the ambassador, to the chair of CD, Ambassador Rocabert, for drawing up the work plan of this commission for the first half of 2022, which is being put to the members today, particularly for the proposal of according priority to discussions that yield specific responses that accelerate post-COVID recovery in our hemisphere. My delegation welcomes the issues chosen to be addressed in the 4 regular sessions of CD, as well as the proposal to hold 3 joint sessions with the Permanent Council, which will enable us to create synergies or tap synergies as between the 2 bodies and make the discussions more effective in the OAS on the issues that are set out in the work plan. Madam Chair, these efforts strengthen the Commission and make it possible to go forward with a more robust and structured agenda, which, in addition to strengthening dialogue, should enable us to generate more concrete and effective results to address the challenges we face as a region. Once again, congratulations on your initiative and your effort. Thank you, Madam Chair. I thank the delegation of Mexico for your support for this plan and this approach. I now verify that no other delegations are seeking the floor. Is that right? So I propose that CD adopt the proposed work plan for the first half of 2022 as set forth in document CD/doc 340/22 Rev 1. Therefore, if there are no objections, it is approved. This takes us to the next item on our agenda, and these are 2 Inter-American sectoral meetings of CD. To speak to this issue, I offer the floor to the Director of the Department of Social Inclusion, Matilde Munoz. Matilde Munoz, you have the floor. Thank you very much, Ambassador Rocabert, Chair of this Council. I also send greetings to Ambassador Rita Clavier de Scioli, Chair of the Council, as well as our Secretary for Access to Equity, Maria Carmen Plata, and my colleague Maris Robert, in representation of the Executive Secretariat for Integral Development. Ladies, distinguished delegates, as this is the first time that I'm addressing CD this year, I would like to extend greetings to each and every one of you, and also to thank the Chair of the Council, Ambassador Rocabert, for allowing us to share some information, progress, and challenges facing the ministerial process for social development as the Technical Secretariat and on behalf of CDACE, Inter-American Social Development Committee. As the meeting of the Inter-American Social, the ministerial side, the ministerial has had some setbacks because of delays in the ministerial in the context of CD. This delay has been due to several factors. First of all, the global COVID-19 pandemic, which broke out in early 2020, put a lot of pressure on the capacity for response of government institutions, particularly the counterpart institutions in this ministerial process, as we have been discussing in the panel that just concluded, and particularly the agencies and ministries in charge of social development in the region, which have had to give priority to the challenges, social protection challenges at the national level stemming from the pandemic and the excessive demands on them, which limited their ability to go forward with all the aspects of the ministerial cycle in the time frames that had been previously defined. Now, second, the establishment of the working groups for implementing the Guatemala Action Plan, well, that was in late 2019. For the process took time, for it required extensive and major effort to socialize, to invite, to convene each of the countries which today are make up these groups. It's because of this that the Guatemala Action Plan it's the first action plan in the area of social development that has been approved under the OAS, and hence it was necessary to do a great deal to share its content among the sectoral social development authorities and to encourage these authorities to take part in and to assume leadership of the different groups. Despite these challenges, the authorities of the Inter-American Commission for Social Development, CDAs, and the Troika of the process, Paraguay, Guatemala, and Dominican Republic, reaffirmed their commitment to implementing the Guatemala Action Plan and have been actively holding several virtual working meetings in which it's been possible to draw up a work plan which was approved in April of 2021. From then on, the working groups, as I've already indicated, have seen active participation. They have met regularly since 2021, designing and carrying out activities to implement the Guatemala Action Plan. This was exemplified by the government representatives who also participated in the panel. As we've also recognized here, it's the leadership of these countries and their commitment to giving impetus to social development work in the OAS that has enabled us to effectively prioritize the ministerial meetings over the last 5 years. I take this opportunity to thank the chairs of the working groups that were with us today. Ramon Montes Barreto, who is Director General for Monitoring and Evaluation for Development at the Secretariat for Wellbeing of Mexico, who chairs Working Group Number 1, and from the Inter-American Committee for Social Development, CDAs, also, and Mr. Ivan Elder Espinal, who's Technical Director of the Social Policy Coordination Cabinet of the Dominican Republic, who is chairs Working Group Number 2. Both of their statements, as we saw, expounded on the work that they've been doing in relation to this process. Mindful of the commitment of the countries that are participating in the working group, the authorities of the social development ministerial process and the Dominican Republic as the host country of the next REMTES, which has been key for guaranteeing continuity of the ministerial social development process in the OAS, and also mindful of the importance of, more than ever, of strengthening regional ties and cooperation for collectively designing strategies for the recovery of our countries, as is promoted by gatherings such as this, and mindful of the general provisions of the CD rules establish mechanisms for adjusting the calendar for unforeseen circumstances on an exceptional basis, we would kindly ask this council to consider the updates to the timetable for the triennial ministerial cycle, which we will now present. And these are to have the meeting moved from, the idea is that it would be held on the dates of originally proposed by the Dominican Republic, 16 and 17 of November of this year. First of all, today we will present for approval of this council the invitation to the 5th REMDES by the Dominican Republic at the same time as a meeting of the Inter-American Committee for Social Development is being called for March 22nd, 2022, with 3 main purposes in mind: to analyze progress and implementation of the ministerial mandates, analyze the regional trends in this respect, and the relevance of the work of the OAS in the priority areas, and, of course, reach agreement on the upcoming ministerial and set out guidelines to the Secretary
and the next documents that will be adopted at the ministerial meeting. Following that, the regular meeting of CD for the 26th of April, we would have the presentation of the preliminary draft text of the following documents: the agenda, the annotated agenda, the declaration, the plan of action, and the provisional list of observers and guests. In April, CDIS will also begin the informal negotiations for the documents and will send the corresponding invitations to the member states. At the regular meeting of CD on the 31st of May, we would approve the agenda for the meeting, and on the 28th of July, we would have the preparatory meeting for the 5th REMDES, finalizing any negotiations on documents, the presentation of the draft schedule, and consideration of other matters pertaining to the organization of the ministerial meeting. Thus, on the basis of this update, we could ensure the carrying out of the key steps in preparing these meetings, allowing us to stick to the original date proposed for the REMDES meeting on the 17th and 18th of November of this year. I again would like to thank the host country for the commitment it has made in being actively involved in the working groups, and we would like to kindly consider that the Council consider this proposed schedule of activities in preparation for the ministerial meeting, the next REMDES. In conclusion, I'd like to reaffirm the importance of these types of gatherings in view of the very difficult context facing this region with the historic increase in poverty and inequality as a result of the pandemic and the global effects that the current health crisis has imposed, making it all the more necessary to increase hemispheric cooperation to move forward in a strong, equitable, and sustainable recovery with the support that the OAS can give its member states, and the social development is the ideal space for this purpose. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mrs. Munoz, for this presentation. Distinguished colleagues, we've heard the reasons that have prevented the social development process from sticking closely to the ministerial CD cycle, but the activities have still continued, and CDs and the Technical Secretariat are ready to continuing with their work with the purpose of having a ministerial meeting in November of this year. I would like to now call on any delegation that would like to refer to the information shared by the Technical Secretariat and the adjustments proposed to the schedule for the hosting the ministerial meeting in November 2022. Let me check. May I take it, since I don't see any requests for the floor, may I take it that CD agrees to the schedule proposed by the Secretariat and therefore approves the schedule with the adjustments? There being no objection, it is approved in compliance with the general provisions and guidelines for sectoral ministerial meetings of the senior authorities of CD, and on an exceptional basis, the adjustments to the schedule on social development is adopted as appears in document CD Doc 342/22. Approved. We have also approved those adjustments. Now I would like to call on the delegation of the Dominican Republic to refer to the convocation for the 4th regular session of the Inter-American Commission on Social Development and the 5th meeting of ministers and senior authorities in social development. I now would like to call on Ambassador Bueno, representing the Dominican Republic. Thank you, Madam Chair. Mrs. Maris Robert, the Director of the Economic Development Department of SEDI, Mrs. Mari Carmen Plata, Secretary for Access and Equity, distinguished delegates, and member states of the OAS, good morning. The delegation of the Dominican Republic would like to take the floor to reiterate what has been said by Director Cristina Munoz, which is that in spite of the obstacles and setbacks in the cycle for these meetings at the OAS, we as the Dominican Republic, as the host country for the next meeting of ministers and senior social development authorities, we continue our interest in hosting this gathering. We believe that one of the major lessons of the pandemic has been to increase the recognition of global interdependence and the need to develop mechanisms that can strengthen our partnerships and hemispheric cooperation to deal with the many challenges affecting our region. That is why we would like to take this opportunity to express our renewed commitment to hosting the next REMDES in our country. And today we would like to formally submit to the Inter-American Council for Integral Development the consideration of the draft resolution convening the 5th meeting of ministers and senior authorities in social development to be held in the Dominican Republic on the 17th and 18th of November of this year, and the 4th regular session of CIES. In addition, to follow up on the ministerial process as stipulated, we convene the meeting of the Inter-American Commission on Social Development, CIDES, for this next 22 of March 2022, as said by Director Munoz. We also are pleased to invite the ministers and senior social development authorities of member states to participate in both meetings. And we hope and urge you to celebrate this in our country and support this change that is so necessary in our times. Thank you very much. We also would like to avail ourselves of this opportunity to thank the participation of the presenters today, particularly our Ministry for Coordination of Social Policies, to whom we wish the best success in this work and in the Group 2 work and the fifth red, as we will be supporting fully. We also would like to thank each one of the member states who are a part of CD and the chair for having approved the changes to the calendar. And we also would like to thank your support for the draft resolution on convening the meeting with a good development of the meeting and success of the meeting. We will look forward to hosting you soon in the Dominican Republic, and we hope that this will be a forum where we can have a strong, substantive dialogue on social development policies to address the new challenges in this hemisphere and increase our social development. Thank you very much for your presentation and the submission of the draft resolution. Ambassador, I now call on any delegation that would like to refer to the draft resolution presented. I'd like to verify that there has been no request for the floor, and there being no other comment, I propose that CD approve the draft resolution to convene the fourth regular session of the Inter-American Commission on Social Development to be held virtually on March 22 of 2022, and the fifth meeting of ministers and senior authorities in social development to be held in Santo Domingo, Dominican Republic on the 17th and 18th of November 2022. And I thank the government of the Dominican Republic for their generous growth and offer them the necessary support to ensure a successful meeting. If there is no objection to the chair's proposal, it is so approved. Thank you very much. Well, we have concluded the consideration of the items on today's agenda. But before I call on delegations that would like to bring to the council's attention any other point of information, I'd like to remind you that we still have pending the election of the chairman of the Committee on the Partnerships for Development Policies. We have not received any nominations yet, and I would like to invite you to consider supporting the work done by this committee and submit nominations so that the election can take place at the next regular meeting of CIDE, and the committee can start doing its activities and work. Thank you very much. Now, I would like to report that the alternate representatives of the United States, Mrs. Christina Brooks, will be concluding her functions at the permanent mission of her country, and this is the last CD meeting in which she will participate. On behalf of her colleagues at CD and in my own personal capacity as the permanent representative of Panama, I would like to express to her our deepest appreciation for the work she has done, her very appropriate and timely contributions, and the warmth of her person is something that we will miss very much at this council. We wish you the best of success in any responsibilities that have been entrusted to you and in your personal life. Until we meet once again, Cristina, a warm embrace from the Commission and all the members of it. Now I'd like to ask if any delegation would like to bring up any other matter to this council or express your best wishes to the delegate of the United States. I call on dear Cristina from the United States.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. And I just want to take the opportunity to express my gratitude to all of my colleagues from the member state missions, as well as our dear colleagues from the OAS, from the SETI, Executive Secretary Osborne, who is not present today, Maurice in her capacity, so many individuals at SETI who have made such an incredible difference in our work together with US programming, all of the projects that we do. I can't thank you enough for that support over the last 3 years. And I also want to extend to my CD colleagues from across the mission states, our member states, how much I've appreciated our time together, all of the fun projects that we've worked on, important issues. I can't believe it's been almost 3 years. And out of those 3 years, only 9 months were in person. So I've had a lot to reflect on. I miss the rooms. I miss walking around the OAS. And as I joke, I even miss the coffee outside of our meeting rooms where we would all meet and pour a cup of tea or coffee and talk through our issues. But I sincerely want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. It's been a phenomenal experience representing my country here at the OAS. And one of the things I think about is the OAS is the oldest regional institution in the world. And we talk about how we're part of a tradition, we're part of something important. And whether we come or whether we go, we hope to leave the OAS in a better place. We hope to contribute to its growth. And I have a big soft spot in my heart for development work and for the work that we've done together here at this institution. And I am really proud to say that I was able to contribute. So thank you all so very much. You always have a friend in me and the U.S. mission. My dear colleague, Juliana Ains Neville, will continue in serving the mission and representing at CEDI, as well as my colleague, Lisa Conesa. You are in wonderful hands. And again, I thank you so very much.
Gracias, Cristina.
Thank you, Cristina. Could you leave Cristina on the screen a minute, because I'd like to call on our director, Roberts, who would like to speak as well. And so can you please put Cristina back on the screen? We'd appreciate it. There, she's back there.
In the absence of Secretary Osborne, and on behalf of SEDI, on behalf of the entire Secretariat, I would like to take this opportunity to thank Ms. Bruff, Cristina, for her and her mission's support for several of our development projects in SEDI, namely, and I'm just going to give a few, the SBDC project, the ACE program, ITEN, ECPA, and most recently, the Women's Economic Empowerment Program. We look forward to continuing working with Ms. Ains Neville, with Juliana. We are also, Cristina, very appreciative of your leadership in the organization of the third specialized CD meeting of high-level authorities of cooperation held this past December. I mean, you were the chair of this process, and along with you were the vice chair of this process, and along with the chair, El Salvador, you both played an instrumental role in helping the Secretariat identify new partners for integral development at the OAS and move these issues forward. So thank you again, and all the best in your new chapter, as we say in English or Spanish. Muchas gracias. Thank you very much, and thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Director Roberts, and I hope that you always have fair winds in the future in anything you undertake. I am quite sure that you will be giving your best, as you've always done over the past 3 years, even during a pandemic and in virtual means. A very warm embrace from all the delegates. And I now would like to ask if there's any additional topic for discussion. If not, then I would like to say farewell to Cristina, and this meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much to all of you. The meeting is adjourned.